we see into the life of things. If this be but a vain belief, yet, oh, how oft, in darkness and amid the many shapes of joyless daylight, when the fretful stir unprofitable and the fever of the world have hung upon the beatings of my heart, how oft in spirit have I turned to thee, O sylvan Wye, thou wanderer through the wood. How often has my spirit turned to thee? This short section doesn't really seem to add very much. The poet's already told us how the rural landscape sustained him in lonely rooms and mid the din of towns and cities, and now he simply reiterates the point, couching it in slightly different language, with his spirit turning to the memory of the river while he is amid the fretful stir and the fever of the world. Basically just saying the same thing with different words. This tendency to prolixity, to droning on after he's made his basic point, is one of Wordsworth's faults. Seeing into the life of things is a powerful note, and I find myself almost wishing that he'd ended the poem here. His next thought will be that his present sojourn by the Wye will provide life and food for his spirit in future years, just as it has done in the past, which is hardly an earth-shattering thought. And then he goes on to reflect on his youth and how his feelings towards nature have changed. And now, with gleams of half-extinguished thought, with many recognitions dim and faint, and somewhat of a sad perplexity, the picture of the mind revives again. While here I stand, not only with the sense of present pleasure, but with pleasing thoughts that in this moment there is life and food for future years. And so I dare to hope, though changed no doubt from what I was when first I came among these hills, when, like a roe, I bounded o'er the mountains by the sides of the deep rivers and the lonely streams, wherever nature led, more like a man flying from something that he dreads than one who sought the thing he loved. For nature then, the course of pleasures of my boyish days, and their glad animal movements, all gone by, to me was all in all. I cannot paint what then I was. The sounding cataracts haunted me like a passion. The tall rock, the mountain, and the deep and gloomy wood, their colours and their forms were then to me an appetite, a feeling, and a love that had no need of a remoter charm by thought supplied, nor any interest unborrowed from the eye. That time is past, and all its aching joys are now no more, and all its dizzy raptures. Not for this faint I, nor mourn nor murmur. Other gifts have followed. For such loss I would believe abundant recompense. I'm quite struck here by the idea that in his youth the poet turned to nature more like a man flying from something that he dreads than one who sought the thing he loved. Was there something in his life that he dreaded and which made him fly towards nature? Or did the mere act of flying towards nature arouse the feeling of dread in him? Whichever it is, he seems more to have been running away from something than towards something. What might it have been that he so feared? These lines were composed in 1798, and 5 years have passed, he says. So the poet's previous visit would have been in 1793. This was the year in which the French Revolution turned into the Reign of Terror. And I can't but feel that this is what Wordsworth's talking about here. In the prelude he writes, "Bliss was it in that dawn to be alive, but to be young was very heaven." And, like many of the Romantic poets, He saw the French Revolution as a tremendous assertion of the human spirit. And here, I think, he refers obliquely to his misgivings as it turned into a bloodbath. Overall, though, I don't feel any great empathy with the poet in these lines. The aching joys and the dizzy raptures of the poet in his younger days don't really capture my imagination. I understand, but I'm not engaged. But just as I'm about to give up and conclude that the poem lost direction halfway through, Wordsworth surprises me. For I have learned to look on nature, not as in the hour of thoughtless youth, but hearing oftentimes the still sad music of humanity, nor harsh nor grating, though of ample power to chasten and subdue. And I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts, a sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of setting suns, and the round ocean, and the living air, and the blue sky, and in the mind of man, a motion and a spirit that impels all thinking things, all objects of all thought, and rolls through all things. Therefore am I still a lover of the meadows and the woods and mountains, and of all that we behold from this green earth, of all the mighty world of eye and ear, both what they half create and what perceive, well pleased to recognise in nature and the language of the sense the anchor of my purest thoughts, the nurse, the guide, the guardian of my heart and soul, of all my moral being. The assuredness, the composure, the control here puts the lines leading up to it in a very different perspective. The poet intends us to feel distanced from his younger self, just as he himself does. Those lines weren't meant to engage us. They were there to contrast with what follows, with the poet's present understanding of nature. Even so, if I'd been Wordsworth's publisher, I'd probably have been advising him to cut everything between "we see into the life of things" and "for I have learned to look on nature." As for this section itself, much as I like it, it lays itself slightly open to ridicule with that word "something." We've got all that build-up, a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts, a sense sublime of something, which feels like a bit of a letdown, a failure to exploit the power of words and language. Surely he could have found a better word. That isn't quite fair, because, of course, it isn't just something. It's something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of setting suns, and so on. This use of cataphoric reference, of defining something through what follows, rather than by what precedes it, is part of the resonance, part of the measured tone of these lines.